This show contains raw conversations about drugs, alcohol, ableism related to neurodiversity, active combat, PTSD, childhood trauma, sexual assault, active addiction, and suicide. It also contains coarse language. Please use care when listening.
I'm back to my same old ways. I swear I try to change, but you just feel so right when I do wrong. So right along.
So the first time I got blown up, I was actually packing a can of chew.
How many times has he been blown up? Is that the next question?
Yeah.
Are we live? Are we rolling? All right. Please continue. The first time you got blown up, was it Copenhagen or Kodiak?
Copenhagen.
Okay, sweet.
See, but okay, so we'll back up there too. The blown up piece is like a bomb blew up.
Okay.
And I was in a close enough proximity to it that I not only felt it, right, but potentially saw it. And I mean, because you could definitely not
Now,
see it.
this
and it
doesn't
still
happen
hits you.
often, Malloy, but that doesn't sound that hardcore to me. You were close enough
That's 'cause
to a
he's making
bomb
it sound like it's
going
not.
off
Well,
that you
that's his
could
baseline.
see it.
Yeah.
I've been to fireworks displays. I've seen bombs going off. You're going to have to give us a little more.
I think
my
when
guy.
he says you could see it, he's talking more that you can actually see the sound wave from the bomb as it's coming towards you.
There's a
Okay.
piece of that. Yeah, there's a piece of that. Well, okay. So,
I wish everybody could see Malloy's face because Malloy's like, fuck you, dude.
so let's explain it
Awesome.
a little bit better, right?
Please.
And I'll be a little brief about it, but
I don't think this is going in the show, but maybe it is. Copenhagen.
and I'm opening the top of it and boom, right? And so when it did that, it threw me against the wall. And when it threw me against the wall, my Copenhagen fell to the ground.
Oh, that's tragic.
And I was pissed.
Right?
I was like,
dropping your coffee.
if we have a gunfight, I'm gonna be on this one, right? And I'm a commander, but at that time I was not commanding because we were doing.
I'm going to have to throw time out again because here's why.
Well, and this is I think
here's
the
why.
producer's notes too.
Because
Oh, yeah.
you said the first time I got blown up, you led with seeing it as opposed to leading with it blew me backwards like that. Is it?
Yeah, but I think a lot of, okay, so if something, okay, we're rolling down the road and we're in a platoon
Okay.
and
Are you on foot or are you in a
in trucks.
Okay, you're in trucks.
I'm talking about one time in specific.
Okay.
And I'm about to get triggered during. So I'm the 2 truck, okay?
Okay.
And this is going to sound weird, but stay with me. I'm the 2 truck, but my 2 truck is in the 1 position. So my 2 truck in the 1 position, I'm the next guy, then my team sergeant, and then our last people. So headquarters is in the middle.
Okay.
So we're rolling through, and nobody gets hit in a place where we think we're going to get hit. And then the truck right behind me gets hit. And when it gets hit, these are multiple ton vehicles.
Now is this an RPG or an IED?
IED.
Okay.
Improvised explosive
Explosive
device.
device.
Thank you.
Okay, well done.
Because I won't remember. I can tell you acronyms all day long, but sometimes I don't know what the hell the actual.
yes.
So, what? Okay, so this thing blows up, and when it does, it lifts the truck in the air,
Jeez
and you
Louise.
can see the ground like open up, right, to move this vehicle in the air. And when that happens, I see my team sergeant fall out of the turret, and I know that there's multiple guys in that vehicle that just found the roof with their heads.
Yeah.
And who knows how that driver's feeling, right? Because he's in a very small place as well.
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you've never been in a Bradley, it's pretty tight quarters. And so all of those people in that truck, right, would say that they were in an IED explosion. But the truck before and behind it, they probably didn't get a lot, but they still got some, right? So when these people, if you say, yeah, you know, when I got blown up, there's it's just definitely on a spectrum.
Okay, so this is perfect. So this leads directly into the title of episode 4. So welcome everybody. Harder Than Healing. Jason Lemire, the playwright.
Nathaniel, the clinician.
Donald Malloy, the Green Beret.
Episode 4 is called Drowning Pools. It's our episode about trauma. And the Drowning Pools episode title comes from 2 places. One was a theater exercise I did with students at Colorado ThesCon, and the other comes from, what's the band called? Disturbed?
I believe it's Disturbed.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Pretty sure it's Disturbed.
So Disturbed has a song called Drowning Pools, the Let the Bodies Hit the Floor song. That was, Malloy, correct me if I'm wrong, very popular with vets and the armed forces in general.
So I would say that it was probably to a particular audience, but we even had a deployment that was kind of created a film to this deployment, and that was one of the main songs of this video. So I would say yes.
Okay. What's wild is that I'm leading this exercise. I got like 70, 80 kids in this room, and the question I asked them was, what do you wish there was a really good play about? Like, what topic do you wish there was a really good play about? And a number of kids said trauma. I said, all right, great. What you're going to do over the next half hour, you guys don't really know each other, but for the next half hour, you're going to try to create just like a 30-second theater piece grappling with whatever topics you want. And like a group coalesced around wanting to explore trauma. And they ended up creating this 30-second theater piece that was remarkable and heartbreaking. And what they did was they used their bodies to create 2 pools. And one pool was, we as the audience came to understand, was like a 25-foot deep pool. And the other pool was like an 8-foot deep pool. And you had characters in each pool. And the character in the 20-foot deep pool is clearly drowning. They are drowning in 20 feet of water. The other character in the 8-foot pool is also drowning. They're drowning more slowly, but if they stay in that pool long enough, they will also drown. But the trouble that the person in the more shallow of those pools was having was they felt guilty. They felt bad. They were like, well, my pool's not as deep as their pool, so you guys should take care of them. I'll be okay. It's not as bad for me. Don't worry about me. They've got it much worse than I do. And then eventually it becomes very dangerous for them too, because there's only so long you can make it in an 8-foot pool.
Yeah.
And so I was just totally blown away by the brilliance of these kids coming up with this metaphor on the spot, working with people they had never met before, being super vulnerable. And so I would love to ask you guys what you think of that metaphor and how it relates to your experiences as clinicians and working with vets.
It's funny because while you tell it, in my head I'm thinking about all the veterans that I work with and how every single one of them's like, no, I don't need the help. I don't need the help. You need to help the other guy that needs the help. It's like, well, I'm helping all y'all. Why would you want to push away a certain amount of help so that somebody else can have access to that? You all have access. No. I know how this works. And it's like, but I don't think you do, right? Accept the help. And it's this idea of like, no, I'm in the 6-foot pool, right?
What do you think about that as a byproduct of training for you guys, though?
That's interesting because I think me personally, I can see myself as one of those people that would not want the help, period, the end. I would say that a lot of veterans will, and obviously we don't start off veterans, or we start off service members, so I would say there's probably a pretty good population of guys and gals that get it, that if they even did want help, their people, their command, their sergeants, their whatever, are going to tell them, sick hall, sick hall, right? That doesn't, yeah. So sick hall is a place where you're supposed to go when you don't feel good. And that's just not going to happen, right? When you're like, oh, my leg hurts or my eye hurt in some way, and you tell a senior NCO that, a senior non-commissioned officer that, no, that's just not going to go well.
Let alone something as vulnerable as like my soul hurts,
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
my brain hurts,
Right.
my spirit hurts.
I mean, so much so that a commander would probably not feel comfortable doing that themselves. They don't even have to, respond to somebody else, right? Or ask anybody else, and they could probably even keep it under wraps. I'm pretty sure I could at some point. No, you're right. I mean, there's a culture in the military that is very much, pain or discomfort is going to be slightly unacceptable.
And so like I'm joking about like the levels of trauma and severity of the number of times that you were blown up, Malloy. And like I'm in therapy right now and I've never been even close to an explosion. If driving home today, I saw a vehicle 20 feet in front of me get hit with an IED, you better believe that's all I'm talking to for my therapist for the next like 5 years. And so like it's so funny because like we haven't known each other that long, and the number of stories you've already told me where like when I hear you tell me, a explosion went off and I dropped my dip, I'm like, that's like a funny Malloy story. That's fucked up. You were in a place where people were trying to kill you.
Well, this goes to the notes from you guys yesterday with the production stuff. Like if this thing's not hardcore, then what is?
Yeah.
Right? And I think part of that is because it becomes normalized, right? So there's this experience where if you every single time you got blown up started freaking out, you would not be very good at your job.
Well, and the other piece of this too is this goes back to the pools, right? When I dropped my can of dip and when I was in the 2 truck, that to me is the 8-foot pool, right?
Yeah.
These other guys were in the 20-foot pool.
Yeah.
And there's, I have this semi-embarrassing, nobody else would think it's embarrassing, but it was embarrassing for me. In the fog of war, air quotes, I was in this truck and I was trying to steer air assets and medevac and all this stuff, right? And I could still hear most of my guys because I was in the truck. And I wanted to get out of the truck, but I felt like I couldn't get out of the truck and help them pull security or even walk around and find out if anybody needed anything. And everybody was pulling security on this vehicle that was now fucked up. And I still remember thinking afterwards, man, why didn't I have the wherewithal to get out of the truck and just move my radios in a way where I could have supported better on the ground? To me, that was the most fucked up part, is I couldn't be on the ground to help them, not because I couldn't have been, but because I just didn't think about it quick enough, right? That was my failure, and that part stuck with me more than the rest of it. So
Yeah, that's clearly still eating at you, dude.
oh yeah, and it always will. But yeah,
All right, so this, like, I think maybe now is a valuable time to step back and just sort of let's really be clear about our terms here, right? What is trauma? And how is all trauma similar?
That's you.
so what is trauma? So the very simple piece to this is that trauma is either too much, too fast, too early, too soon, too much of something. When our brain can't comprehend of what is going on, then our brain starts to shut down, right? And it doesn't shut down as a whole. It shuts down in a way of saying there's a whole lot of feedback I'm getting from my environment, and I'm going to allow the brain to access some of it, and some of it it's just not, right? And that's why people, when they have crisis or trauma in some way, cannot remember all of it, so to speak, and struggle to remember pieces. And those pieces are there, but it's because the brain was like, yeah, that's too much of this thing, right? And sometimes that too much gets in, and then you, whether it's flashbacks or whatever else, and it becomes this intrusive thought, right? Because you never wanted it in the first place, but now you got it.
It's also our brain keeping us safe, right? It turns it. I define it a lot of times as you go lizard brain.
So what you're describing is the trauma response.
In some ways, yes.
Okay.
But our brain, like, we shut off our prefrontal cortex when we're in that traumatic moment.
Okay.
So when people talk about being triggered, a piece of what happens is that you don't have access to your prefrontal cortex anymore. You're operating straight out of your lizard brain. So you're just specifically working through, I need to make sure that I'm breathing and that I'm walking, right? Like, it becomes more instinctual and animalistic. It's not a conscious, thoughtful process.
I like to think about that part as like the amygdala highway,
Right.
right? And that's when we get stuck in that part of the brain that is solely responsible for emotion. And the bottom line is, because the rest of the prefrontal cortex is offline, we can't solve the simple problem as to how to find a way to get out of the amygdala, right? And start to look at the bigger picture. We're stuck in emotion.
Well, and this is exactly what just happened, right? Where you were at the beginning of this episode saying, I'm going to get triggered by this.
Yeah.
And then you were like, that still bothers you, clearly. So in this moment, there's that piece of, I'm still traumatized by this experience. This is triggering for me. And even though it may seem like it's not intense for him, it still is activating.
And so it's funny because while you ask that question, and because I think trauma is complex, there's all kinds of ways to describe it.
Okay.
But for me, the piece that I kind of hang my hat on is, if I, as a clinician, see somebody that either rehearses a story or gets stuck going back to that story, it's a place where you get stuck, right? So when somebody talks about that thing or goes back to that thing, if I call somebody up and I'm talking to them for a little while and they go back to this thing over and over and over, they're stuck. And to me, that's trauma.
And break it down one more time. It was too much.
And I mean, you can pretty much put just about anything after that to something, right? Too much, too fast, too ugly, too soon, too much of something. It's as if we have, and this is where I believe there's a belief system we have in our head, and beliefs change with trauma. So if I have the belief that I'm safe, and all of a sudden I found out I'm not safe, now my belief might be I'm never going to be safe.
And it amplifies when it's in a particular situation. So to use the pools, if you have an experience that's traumatizing while you're at a pool, when you go back to that pool, you're going to have that same thing happen for you again. Whether it's an 8-foot pool, whether it's a 20-foot pool, doesn't make any difference.
Never safe.
Never safe.
And everybody else around you is like,
Well,
get
no,
over it.
shoot, yeah.
How can you?
Okay. All right. So you
water.
used the phrase "get over it." The playwright that made me want to be a theater major, that made me want to just like drop everything. I quit the soccer team, all the things because of this playwright named Danny Hawk, playwright and actor. I saw his stuff and I said, man, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And he's got a show called Jails, Hospitals, and Hip Hop. And it's all monologues. And one of his characters is a corrections facility guard. And he's being forced to see the psychiatrist because there was a violent incident. And he now has to, and he comes in with all this toughness, and the piece starts, he's sitting out in the waiting room. And he's waiting for the other guy to finish up who's in there. And he's like bitching and complaining. And at one point he goes, he's crying? Guy's in there crying? Pfft, how long does it take to cry?
That's fun. That's fun. So we're going to have somebody on here in a bit, right? And I think that would be a fantastic question for him. And the reason why is because when your brain goes offline for some of these things, right? And we talked about it, I think, in a couple episodes ago, where this idea of like you put this trauma into a box, you have to,
Yep.
You have to, right? Because if you can't if you're in the middle of something and this crisis happens, the next day you could stay stuck, right? But a lot of times you want to compartmentalize that, put it in the box, put it on the shelf, and move on with life. And if you don't go back to that box, that's going to be painful, right? And especially when you open up that box after years, it's going to be painful.
Mm.
Yeah, the sooner you can get to it, I think the sooner you can actually address it for what it is, in a way where you're able to accurately address what it is that's shutting down. I mean, that's why you go back to the story over and over and over again, because you're trying to move past that piece of, this is all I can remember about this. This is what this experience was for me, and there's nothing left after that. And it's the piece of it's taking that box off the shelf, opening that bad boy up and being like, oh, that was fucked up.
And what's interesting about that is that I think a lot of my veterans would say, like, yeah, do I really want to open up that box though? And it's like, well, think about it this way, right? If you never open up that box, you can keep that sucker hidden away for as long as you want. However, that box holds the control that you will have in the future over your own emotions.
Holds the key to you moving forward.
And if you leave that there, I talk about this pie chart occasionally when I'm doing my trauma challenge. And this pie chart is all the things that you need to be able to control, to be able to feel empowered with your everyday, right? Like if I get a little sadness, I get a little happiness, I get a little anger, I get a little frustration. If I've had to sit in that for any period of time, I know who I am inside that emotion. And that feels empowering when you're like, I was sad the other day, but I conquered that, right? In whatever way you did.
Right.
But if you don't allow yourself to feel sad, you have no idea what that feels like to be able to crawl out of that hole and come out the other side. If you do that, you feel empowered.
I mean, I think of it like, oh my gosh, I feel of it like a Horcrux, right? Harry Potter reference, my theater kids. That thing you're boxing up, you're not boxing up. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're not boxing up your trauma. What you're boxing up is the part of you that is dealing with that trauma.
You're boxing up yourself.
You're boxing up yourself, a part of yourself, and a part of yourself that you need not only to grapple with the specific traumatic event or traumatic events, but also to grapple with all this other stuff.
100%.
Okay. I think with that, man, Malloy, you have been able to bring in a pretty incredible and inspiring guest. You want to just sort of cue him up a little bit?
So I'd love to. I've worked with this gentleman for several years. I don't want to reveal too much of his story, but what I will say is that when he came to me, I think he could say that pie chart, right, the ego pie chart, that there was a couple of places he didn't even know that some of those pieces of that pie chart existed.
Pieces of himself.
Pieces of himself, yeah. And so he came to me, a very young 70-year-old, and he was struggling with a couple of things.
And came to you in a capacity as a veteran, correct?
As a veteran,
Yep.
as a Vietnam veteran, Air Force guy. I'll let him speak to a lot of that stuff. What I'll speak towards is some of the work that he was able to do with me. Let him know how important he was to the population of people around him, to me, to everybody else. And for a very long period of time, I think he would tell you that sense of worth was not there, right? And so by being able to look at that pie chart, be able to sit in those emotions, exercising a piece of himself, because those boxes were on the shelf, got him closer and closer to being him. And I think he loves that person, which he might talk about it, but that's one of my hallmarks is I want people to learn to love themselves, especially when you sit in that 20-foot pool or you sit in that 8-foot pool.
Word.
And you look at the other person with trauma and you're like, they deserve help, not me. You also deserve the help. And it's not like we need to split that, right, and say one is more important than the other. We all deserve to be loved in some way, shape, or form. And he found the love for himself to be able to come and tell the stories.
So what is the name of this lovely man?
Well, his name is Charles, and I affectionately call him Charles. His name is Greg Callaghan. So Charles, Greg Callaghan, Vietnam veteran. Hope to get him in that chair, and we'll put him on the hot seat.
Amazing. All right, when we come back from break, we've got our guest, and we're going to keep getting into it. This is episode 4 of Harder Than Healing, Drowning Pools, our episode on trauma. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll be right back. All Points North is the official sponsor of the Harder Than Healing podcast. APN offers custom mental health, trauma, and addiction treatment programs at APN Lodge in Colorado. Visit apn.com to learn more. And making the choice to make somebody laugh is making the choice to love them.
Well, there was a difference. Before I met Donnie, my choice to make people laugh was for my benefit so that they would like me and I would feel better about myself. And as my therapy has grown over the last 50 years, I don't think about that. It's just the thought of saying something funny isn't for my gratification.
And I think there was
to make people like me.
So we are back, episode 4 of Harder Than Healing, Drowning Pools. This is our episode on trauma. We are so fortunate to be joined by a veteran, by a beautiful human being, Greg Callaghan.
Thank you, sir.
So we asked the question in the first segment, how long does it take to cry?
For me, it's probably 47, 48 years.
You tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think my trauma is multi-generational. I was emotionally, physically, and sexually abused by both of my parents, one of which was a Harvard graduated from medical school, and the other, my mother, graduated from Massachusetts General as a nurse, which is one of the top nursing schools. And they decided that they liked me more than they did each other. So it started about 9, 10. My dad, back in the day, he had a Polaroid camera, and he would take pictures of what my mom was doing to me. And then when it was his turn, she would take pictures. The old 1960s Polaroid camera. So that started out, like I said, probably 9 or 10. Everything that I ever did after that was never good enough. They kept telling me that if I told anybody, they would send me away. And where away was to me was anywhere but not here. So I tried to do what I needed to do to hopefully would make them not send me away. And it turned out over the years that there wasn't anything I was able to do that would get me past that. I ran away one time, and I was probably 13 or 14. They put me on the bed and raised my feet up, and my dad took his belt and hit the bottom of my feet. And that was to stop me from running away. And because they couldn't do anything, and I was not the image of what we called a DK, a doctor's kid, should be in a small town, his reputation was kind of tarnished because his son was no good. So they sent me away, and when I came home on spring break to military school, when I came home on spring break or for the summer, they put me out on the apartment porch. And in the wintertime, if it got in the 30s, I could come in and sleep on the couch. In the summertime, if it got too hot or it was raining, they had a plastic cover that fit over my, what we called a rollaway bunk bed. And I would spend the summer out there. And when I was in school, they would go on vacations and all this kind of stuff. So I thought that because of all the input that I had, I literally was nothing. I didn't matter to anybody. And it kind of morphed into, well, what good am I? I guess I deserve to be sent away. Military school kind of straightened me out a little bit. I did pretty well in it, considering. I got home and went to college, CSU, and I flunked out. I left at the end of 1 year with a .3 grade point average. I didn't do anything. The structure was not there. It was just gone. So the only choice I had was to join the military.
And this is what year?
1968.
Okay.
And just for clarity, when did you get sent to military school?
When I was a junior in high school, the summer of my junior, the summer before my junior year.
Okay.
It was a high school. There were 20 of them in the country or something like that. And I kind of liked it. It was the cliche, spoiled little rotten kid in military school kind of thing.
Right.
But I really learned a lot about myself, but I lost it when I went to college. And of course, my Harvard-educated father, having a son that flunked out of school, was even more, you are nothing. You're just a piece of crap. Get out of my life. I don't even know who you are. I have my 2 wonderful daughters, and and we're kind of shoving you away because I was starting to act out in my sophomore year, throwing pop cans at the teacher and being suspended from school. And I think what was happening in those sexual, emotional, and all those kinds of things, it was creeping up.
Yeah.
So they sent me away and came back, went to college, flunked out. And so the only option I had was to join the military. I joined the Air Force because my father was a doctor in the Air Force during World War II. I said, okay, he's going to be proud of me. I'm going to follow in his footsteps. I'm going to do something that's going to make a difference.
And I want to ask real quick, clinicians, how common is it for survivors of sexual abuse and survivors of emotional abuse to return to wanting to please or make proud the perpetrator of the abuse?
So for me, it's this idea of that's what they learn to do, right? So at an early age, and you've already kind of said it, right? Like, so I want to do everything I can to please mom and dad so that mom and dad
won't send me away.
Yeah.
Right.
And so if that's your only design, when you start growing older and that's your circuitry, right? That's what you've been doing for years. It's really hard to find the space where you're like, well, what's going to be important for me, right? Because you haven't focused on, you don't even know what that is.
Right. And the baseline is like, not only won't send me away, it's I want to meet this threshold of being accepted and being loved and being connected, whether it's with your family or your siblings. It's huge.
It was, but the issue with that for me is that threshold wasn't defined.
Right.
That it was so subjective. There was no way that I knew that where the bar was.
Yeah.
So when I joined the military, they sent me I was a security police in Otis Air Force Base in Massachusetts. And because I was so low in rank, they would bring me in at midnight from guarding C-121s or F-5s, from guarding them and bringing me in to buff the floors of the office. And that wasn't what I signed up for. I wanted to impress my parents. That's why I joined the Air Force.
Right.
Maybe they'll like me. I called them up. I volunteered to go to Vietnam, And I called him up and told him that I got orders. Volunteered in June, was over there in November. And my father went into a rage about how stupid I was and what was I thinking and what did I expect to accomplish from that. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard from you. And he hung up. So I then went into this idea that maybe I would get approval from what happened in World War II when the war was over and everybody was greeted open arms and Johnny comes marching home kind of a thing. So I keyed in on that. I'm going to go to Vietnam, save the world from the spread of communism, and then come back. And I thought, well, that could happen. I mean, I'll do that, and then they'll like me. When I got home, I got one letter from my parents, and it was a birthday. It was a box. Actually, it wasn't a letter. There was a box wrapped in popcorn with one of these airline bottles of bourbon because I turned 21 over there, and I was one of the older ones. So that was all I got. My girlfriend.
How long were you deployed?
1 year, 364 days. You could extend for 6 months and get 30 days off, but I just wanted to stay and do whatever. So there are some things that happened when I was in Vietnam that kind of put my parents off to the side and put me in the moment of like, what the hell have I done?
So you enter the service. You enter an incredibly trauma-filled environment, already full to the gills, sexual abuse, physical abuse,
Absolutely.
emotional abuse. And then you get there and experience things that just push that trauma even farther back into the closet because now you have some even more immediate trauma that you experienced there. Is that accurate?
That's correct. I wound up with what is normally called survivor's guilt. And there were a couple of local Army, actually one Army local Army recruit from Vietnam, and one of their enemies, the Viet Cong. And I considered under my watch, I got them killed. I wasn't paying attention. I didn't trying to be a macho, show this Vietnamese what it looks like to look through a night scope. And back in the days, they were like a foot wide and on a stand. The three of us were in the tower, and the night scope was in front of us, and I leaned down to the machine gunner down below. He had claymore mines and all this stuff in front of him, and asked him to pop a flare. Well, when I leaned over, a sniper in the village across the wire hit the local Army recruit partially in the face and the neck, and his head was hanging by probably 10 or 12 inches of just skin, blood all over the place. I instinctively, I guess, I had a grenade launcher on my M16, so I popped a couple of those and they were short. And then the whole screaming and the smell and the whole thing, I kind of shut down, I guess, and went into we got to get this guy out of here. But the problem is that for you to get into that tower, you had to open up the floor to get in, and this guy was on the floor. All the blood that was in his body was gone. It was seeking, up literally puddles. And I never really addressed that until we wound up taking him out putting a rope under his arms and hoisting him down the tower because we couldn't open the door. And a couple weeks after that, I was assigned to the same tower. And I remember kind of like just shaking and nerves and tightness and questioning, because I knew that the day before that's where I was going. So I had 24 hours to talk myself into a really big hole. And I got there, and they dropped me off like they did everybody, put us in the back of a deuce and a half, and went to the tower, and that was my guard post.
And a deuce and a half is what?
A 2.5 ton truck.
Thank you.
We'd have 20 guys in it maybe, and they would just pick up the old ones and bring in the new ones. The most terrified I've ever been, I think, even when I was going through the mechanics of dealing with this lifeless body and literally inches of blood on the floor, I didn't remember the details of it that much until decades later. There were some spot things, and then some things came up, and it's, oh my God, that. So this time on the second trip to this tower, nobody had ever asked me after the we had to do what they called an ABR, after battle report, or BAR, something like that. I don't remember what it was called. Mm-hmm. And I got chewed out for returning fire because it was not a free fire zone. Even if we had gotten fired like I did. But they kind of brushed it off, and nobody, and this is what has been really different for me, and what is different in today's military, I think, is that the other 2 or 3 things that happened to me, nobody ever asked me how I was. Mm. They just, that wasn't part of it. Put it in the report. I picked a South Vietnamese soldier out of a rice paddy, grabbed him by his uniform, and pulled him up out of the water. He was MIA, and his arm came off in my hand. And that was within the first 6 months. The third one that was kind of terrifying to me was the North Vietnamese army had the military intelligence would pick up a Viet Cong prisoner of war and bring them back to the base for interrogation. Well, they turned into that if they didn't get the answer that they wanted right away, they'd just push them out of the helicopter at 1,000 feet, 800 feet. So I volunteered to go on a mission to pick up a POW, and so that wouldn't happen. I did it 3 times. The first time, it was good. The second time, all of a sudden I hear the voice raising, all 3, the 2 interrogators and the prisoner. They're yelling and screaming at each other. And within 3 seconds, they had just taken him and just thrown him right out of the helicopter. And I had to go back and think that was my job. I was supposed to protect this man, even though he was an enemy and a human being, by the way. So all this stuff. So back to
let me jump in real quick, because what you're talking about is something that I think a lot of the population or the audience wants to hear too. Is called moral injury, right? When there are pieces of war, of combat, where you are in effect forced to go against your morals, right? And now one of yours would have been, I need to save this human being, but I wasn't able to, and that's a moral injury.
Absolutely, yes. It wasn't more that thought I would get into trouble. I said, what are you doing? This, we even had a reasonable code of ethics on how we were supposed to treat the enemy. And, Lieutenant Callaghan was one of the morons who didn't go by that. Back to the second time I was on that tower, Donnie, because he's my friend, asked me how I got back up on that tower again, and I couldn't tell him. So I spent a year maybe hashing it out in my head on why did I go back up. The only thing I was able to conclude is that they were going to give me an Article 15 for not doing my job and not doing my duty or whatever, and I'd get busted or put in jail or whatever. And it was the same thing. What's the problem? This happened 3 weeks ago. Get your ass up there.
How long does it take to cry?
That's part of it. That's what I dug out.
Yeah.
I did then, okay, I did get up the ladder and I did open up the hatch and got in, and I was shaking, and all I thought about was that's just what I'm supposed to do. I got in there, I shut the door, I took off my flak vest and I put it over my front, and I sat in the back of the guard tower facing out with I kind of made a double protection thing. Didn't look up the whole time. There could have been an army of 10,000 NVAs walk by and I would not have seen them. Which brought me to another point, is that I didn't do what I was supposed to do.
Right. And just for context, this is a 20-year-old man.
Yes, sir. And I was one of the older ones. And I was kind of, I did pretty well in what they called Asian Zone Reaction School. They taught you in San Antonio, Texas, on how to fight in the jungle.
That seems contradictory.
But I was noticed because I didn't have any issue with what type of firearms, how big. I shot all kinds, blew up all kinds of stuff, and I was ready to go.
Right.
All right, so let's ask this then. You had a vision, right? You call your old man. You call your abuser.
Yeah.
I'm enlisting. I'm going to go. You're going to be proud of me. He does not reciprocate, which sounds like a common theme in his relationship with you. You then say, all right, that's going to be okay. It's going to be just like World War II. Johnny's going to come home, and then things will be okay.
That was the first thing that came into my mind. It's just like, I don't care what you're going to say. This is going to happen.
So let's fast forward then, right? You get back stateside. You've completed your deployment. Can you share a little bit about, because I know there's another event here.
They were gone. They moved when I was overseas to a different house. I had to take a taxi to this house that I thought. And when I got there, they were at a party, and I had to break into the house. It was in the middle of December, and I had my short sleeves, and I did. I found a pane, and I just broke it and was able to come in through the back door. And when they came home, my mother says, "Oh, you're back." And my dad just walked into the living room. I met a girl while I was on leave, and I wound up breaking my foot, and I had to go to Fitzsimmons to get it fixed.
Remind us what Fitzsimmons was?
Fitzsimmons Hospital. It was back in the Eisenhower days on Colfax and...
Okay, so this is a VA hospital.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And my dad wouldn't take me to the hospital because he said when he broke his foot or his leg, nobody would take him. Now, I had just bought a really fancy $2,500 orange Volkswagen Beetle with racing stripe on it and everything.
You're proud.
I was.
You're proud of that.
I was, and my payments were $43 a month, and I was making $350, and I did it.
Malibu
so I
Keith
tried
likes
to.
that car. Malibu Keith is into that.
Oh, it was cherry. I loved it. Fancy wheels, but I couldn't put the clutch in because my foot was broken, and so I wound up on crutches going from about 8th Avenue and Colorado Boulevard in Denver to Colfax Avenue on Colfax, and I caught a bus. And I didn't know where Fitzsimmons was. I think I didn't realize how far back from Colfax it actually was, and the bus driver just drove right past it. And as he was driving past it, I saw it. So I told him, I said, the next time you turn, would you please let me off? I walked across Colfax and was on my crutches in my uniform because you needed to wear your uniform if you went to the VA hospital. And that was a total contradiction to them telling us to not wear our uniforms when we got home. So I did it anyway, and this pickup truck with 3 guys in it pulled up next to me and asked me if I wanted to ride. Well, okay, of course. Naive? Oh my God. So back in those days, it was just prairie. And they pulled off on one of the roads, and I said, "Where are you going?" And they took me out. The guy by the door grabbed me by the shoulders because I was in the bed of the truck, and threw me on the ground, and took my crutches, and the 3 of them would take turns beating me with my crutches. And I got a little nose thing and a bruised eye and a couple of cracked ribs. And I remember sitting there thinking maybe they're right. I put up the best fight I could, but it didn't
Maybe
go.
they're right about what?
That maybe I am a piece of crap.
Were they saying why they were doing this to you?
They called me. Well, they were a little more sophisticated. They asked me how many women did I kill or how many babies did I kill, and one was, you must be a Vietnamese. Your eyes are slanted, and just didn't make sense to me. It was totally contradictory to the "When Johnny Comes Marching Home" thing.
Yeah.
So I sucked in on that, and because I had my broken foot, I wasn't able to go to duty when I was stationed in Cheyenne. They let me spend a couple weeks convalescing my ankle. And when I got up there, I was in charge. I got promoted while I was on leave. They put me in charge of the missile launch control facility. That would be the main building where the officers would go down into their capsule and turn the keys. And because I was a new sergeant, I got the midnight shift. I had a year and a half left on my tour, and then I could get out. So all of that stuff that happened to me and not able to talk to anybody about it, I started that hole on that midnight shift in that launch control because I had nobody to talk to.
And this is that question of what does trauma lead to?
It led to the, I guess, the first time I noticed that something was wrong was my second wife. We found a house that she said it just felt right. And I'm trying to do everything right. That's all I knew. Mm-hmm. People, maybe she'll like me if I do this. Maybe my parents will like me if I do this. All this stuff. Mm-hmm. So I said, sure, no problem. We lived in that house a year and a half, and she wanted to move to another one. And that's when I first started thinking that, and it turned out to be a great house. It was okay, but I was doing it for the wrong reasons.
Right.
It was kind of the same. Well, maybe if I do this, which is a pretty huge sacrifice, maybe my own wife will approve. But what happened on that one was there isn't anything that I'm going to be able to do that's going to make this person happy. So I started questioning what's this about, and that's when I wound up in Donald's office. There's something wrong here that I feel like a nobody when my wife wants to move.
Well, and the template has been set.
Absolutely.
Go into that more, if you please, clinician. What do you mean by the template? Because that's heavy, dude.
Well, I mean, a piece of what's happened in the story that you're telling us is that there's been this consistent striving for acceptance
Absolutely.
from the people that you're with, from your loved ones, and not finding that. And that template was set way back in the day when you were in high school as a junior, still looking to get
Or
approval
even
from
even
your-
before that, when he's 9 years
Absolutely.
old,
Yeah,
10 years
absolutely.
old.
Trying to get approval from your family, from your parents, from your father, from your mother, and
Never getting it.
never getting it, and continuing to search for that, and that hoping that will be filled, and recognizing that at some point you're the person who needs to fill that you're the person who's going to be able and responsible for making sure that you're accepting of yourself.
And then, Donald, can you share a little bit what it has been like to work with Greg?
So when Greg came to talk to me first, we were talking about a fair amount of what I would consider feelings of worthlessness, right? Low self-esteem. These pieces of him that, again, if we put the ego in the pie chart, that were missing, right? And one of the first things that we talked about was coping as a style of I love me. And one of the pieces that he said was, to this day, I'll believe he'll probably say it right now, I ask my veterans to get in front of a mirror, point at the mirror and say, I love you, right? And he probably to this day is maybe a little reluctant to do that. So knowing Greg is knowing that Greg maybe is always going to try and fit in. So much so that when he first started coming to one of my groups, he asked me, am I going to fit in? And now I think he'll tell you that he certainly does. But knowing Greg is to know that he wants to be loved. And I think he's really starting to get to that place where he's starting to love himself.
I think the first time I couldn't say I love me or I matter without crying. I couldn't get the words out. And I think it's probably a year ago that I could say I matter. But there's still a little kind of in some things maybe I do, maybe some things I don't.
Well, one of the pieces that I want to make sure we touch on just for a second at least is that there was a period of time when you wanted to take your life.
Twice.
If you could speak to why, and then if you could speak to what keeps you here.
Why, it turns out people's words were the two reasons that put me in the hospital. What they had to say about me and who I was as a human being was at the time a terrible, terrible thing to say to me. And it was mom and dad talking to me all over again. And I'm 70 years old.
Right.
And that reaction is nothing's changed.
Right.
It's been 50 years and I'm still crap. I still don't matter. And it was a hard, living in that hole. I had a psychologist tell me when I was filing for some benefits for PTSD, at the end, and this is the only test I probably ever passed in my life, was that I qualified for PTSD. She told me, what took you so long? And I wasn't able to grasp exactly what all that was. I do now, but I was never. One doctor had me write 10 things that made me happy. And all 10 of those things, and I don't remember what they were exactly, were how somebody else was.
Right.
It makes my daughter, I'm happy when my daughter's this or my whatever. And it had nothing to do with what makes me happy.
Right.
Donnie has helped me tremendously with helping me get out of this hole. The first question he ever asked me was, were you sexually abused as a child? And I thought, oh my God, what have I done? But I asked for this. I said, I'm going to pull off the Band-Aid and see what happens. And I am totally, totally grateful that you stuck with me and helped me and gave me the tools to learn how to be who I was. And
Well-
I am.
Well, and I love that. However, you stuck with it, right? Not me sticking with you, which I want to say that because there's a lot of veterans who tell me after they come in and they expose themselves, right? They become vulnerable. They sometimes think like, well, I didn't think you were going to call me back, right? And there's this piece of them that's like, that was a terrible piece. I can't believe that you're still here to support me. And there's two things that you told me that I thought that other veterans would love to hear. And that's that you were in isolation for years.
Oh, geez.
And tell me about how you got a prescription to come out of isolation by however many hours out of a week.
I didn't start recognizing that I was in a world all by myself until after my first divorce. I would meet somebody and she would maybe spend the night or whatever or not. But I remember one time they came down and she says, why didn't you open up the curtains on the patio door or the windows? And I never thought about doing that. I was living in a cave. Okay. What? That doesn't make any sense to me. I didn't know anybody. The best man in my second wedding was my daughter because I didn't know anybody. And that was 20 years ago. So I was 54 years old, and I was still down there feeling I'm doing okay. I didn't do drugs. I didn't get parking tickets. I didn't get speeding tickets. I was at work every day. I did my job. I got promoted. Everything was fine. But I did all that stuff with my head all the way in the wrong place.
Well, and I think that piece of agency that we've talked about, being able to find that space for yourself where you're able to do the work to move forward, and how important it is for you to have that in your own experience of being able to advocate for yourself, being able to open up and be vulnerable for yourself, and how empowering that can be.
But I think that's almost a guy thing, that to be vulnerable and open to anybody or anything, whether they're mentally healthy or not, that's a tough thing anyway.
Absolutely.
But I've never. I feel like the weight of the world has been lifted from my shoulders because my own responsibility is. It sounds selfish, but I don't know how to do this. Is my happiness.
Absolutely.
And my welfare and my well-being. If I can accomplish that, then everything else kind of comes in, and the cliche, you got to be healthy to you got whatever it is to help somebody. You got to help yourself before you can help somebody else.
Absolutely. 100%.
That's what it turned into.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's do this. Obviously, we could
Go
stay
on
talking
forever.
for another hour plus. What we're going to do is close out with this great question that Malloy asked, which is, you've been through so much trauma, so many different kinds of trauma, and you said on 2 occasions you thought about ending your life.
Yes.
And Malloy's question is, well, now what's the counter to that? Because you're here, and you're mad. You are. I'm gonna just start the thank yous now. Thank you. You have been such a gift. I will just speak from the I. Man, you inspire me with your honesty and your bravery, right? I know every single one of our listeners is incredibly grateful for your integrity, for your authenticity, right?
Thank you, sir.
So you are very much someone that I know a lot of our listeners are looking up to right now. And so I bet they would love to hear from you. What gives you things? What gives you your energy? What keeps you looking forward? Why are you still here, brother?
I think the biggest thing for me is realizing that no matter how long it takes, it gets better. But you have to do the work.
Yes.
They are not going to do it for you. If you're willing to do the work and rip off that Band-Aid and hear what you have to hear, say what you need to say, it becomes progressive to the point that I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
I can live my life respectfully of myself and to everybody else, and then all of a sudden I got people laughing and joking and having a good time with in rec therapy or whatever.
Yeah, man.
My daughter and her children and all this stuff. I don't have to worry about making her happy. She's already happy.
Right.
And the kids are already happy. And nobody has to make me happy because I'm already happy.
Mm.
But it took a long time for me to realize that, with the help of Donnie, to realize that this is where I was. The typical, you can't see the forest for the trees kind of a thing,
Right.
is exactly where I was for almost 50 years.
Mm.
I thought everything was fine. I wasn't in trouble with anybody. I was doing my job.
You have a good head of hair too.
And well, of course, I mean that comes with psychosis, I guess. I don't know, but I feel so much better about myself. I am not. I mean, I used to have my wife carry a tablet so that in the rearview mirror she could write down the license of the car behind me in case something happened to her, or she was going to run into us or whatever. I'm pulling into gas stations, stopping people from trying to get to the same pump, trying to save the world, trying to get somebody to like me. And it just finally came out with 3 or 4 years with Tawny. I don't need to worry about that. I'm a good guy.
Mm.
I have my faults, but what's important is that I recognize what they are. Sometimes I learn the hard way what they are, but I'm still learning. And you have to be able to open yourself up to be able to do that, to get healthy. Sometimes it takes a long time, but if you can do the work, you'll get there.
All right. Well, listen, with that, we're going to say thank you. And, I mean, we're going to have you back sometime. That's for sure.
This is the first time I think I've seen Lemire at a loss for words.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking I want to say thank you, but then it's like the next words are like thank you.
Right.
And thank you. I respect you. I honor you. Welcome home. I cherish you. There's so many beautiful things about your story. And I would honestly say that it's one of the more important success stories that I have in my toolbox that inspires me, right? And I think that's a beautiful thing. My hair just stood up on the back of my neck.
You don't
So-
even have any hair in the back of the neck.
That's true, I
Seems
don't.
good.
Well, there's the difference in where I am now and where I was before. All the stuff that you said just this second, 5 years ago would be,
Right.
now I can sit here and say thank you and believe it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
Wonderful.
that's, for me, that's huge.
Yeah.
And for me, being able to believe it means that I believe in myself.
Yourself. Yep.
There we go. Yeah, absolutely.
Full
I mean,
circle.
Full circle. Thank you so much for your story, for the authenticity. I think that there definitely is a space where you have elevated our game, as it were. And I think the piece of vulnerability and the idea of you got 4 men sitting on couches and in the hot seat, and I'm pretty sure that this is not the story that people expected to hear. So thank you for that.
All right. And with that, we're going to be back in just a moment for episode 4 of Harder Than Healing. Thanks for joining us today. Plus by APN is an official sponsor of the Harder Than Healing podcast. Plus by APN treats the root causes of mental health issues with neurotechnology like deep TMS, ketamine-assisted therapy, and stellate ganglion blocks, so you can get relief from symptoms and find long-term healing. Schedule a free consultation and find your treatment match at plusapn.com. That's PLUSAPN.com. And we're back. This is Harder Than Healing, episode 4, Drowning Pools, our season 1 episode on trauma. When we come back from guests, we kick it over to one MC Mike, the God Mike, our producer Tiffany Morgan, for our producer's notes. Tiffany, how would you close out this show? What are some things that came up for you?
That was a extremely heavy episode, and to the original conversation about boxes, that probably opened up some boxes for some of our listeners, because it certainly opened up some in this room. We all had to take some deep breaths after that. So with that being said, we also want to focus on the hope that we don't have to be stuck in that heavy place. We don't have to be stuck in our trauma, and just talk about the resources that are available to people that are going through similar things that Greg has gone through. And we will certainly list a significant amount of resources in our notes for this podcast, or for this episode specifically, that relate to everyone, not just veteran specific. And more importantly, I want to give a big shout out to APN, who's doing this, hosting this for us.
All Points North.
All Points North. It's where we are. And they have an amazing substance abuse treatment program here. And a big piece of what they do is trauma work. So many people hear substance abuse and they think of the word junkie or addict or, but no one thinks about the story behind it. What got someone to that point? That doesn't just happen. Like you said, we don't just wake up one day and I want to be a heroin addict. And what is it that we need from a treatment center? And it's that trauma-informed care piece that the clinicians here, the doctors, the staff, they understand either from a personal perspective or from a professional perspective how they've been trained, that how significant trauma is, how it affects the way that we think, how it affects our physical body, how it affects our relationships. And they bring that in a very unique way to the treatment setting and how important that is.
Thank you. Malloy, I know that you wanted to speak a little bit to close out the episode about the boxes that Tiffany mentioned. You want to share that with us, please?
Yeah, so the boxes is this thing that I started talking about in the Trauma Challenge. And the Trauma Challenge, Greg was a part of that. The boxes, as we talked about earlier, is, you have this trauma. This trauma becomes a part of you. And if we avoid it, obviously we avoid a part of ourselves. So we put a box on the shelf, right, when this crisis happens, literally because we just don't want to tap into it. And what happens is, over the course of time, and I can't even imagine how many times it would happen for someone like Greg, right? At a very early age, there's your first box. You don't know how to deal with it. You don't want to deal with it. You don't see yourself knowing how to deal with it. So you keep on putting more boxes up there, right? And I don't know how long that lasts before you all of a sudden look up to this wall and you have so many boxes that it becomes overwhelming. And when it becomes overwhelming, a lot of my veterans would flat out say, hey, that would be cool. I would love to touch on some trauma and figure that out. but you don't know the extent of which these boxes influence my life. And to touch on one means I'm going to touch on a few, which means I'm going to touch on a lot, which means I'm in a spiral. And so one of the things to note is that when Greg first started to come and see me, he wasn't in a super bad place as much as he just wanted to put things together. When he had suicidal thoughts was probably a year and a half later, right? So he had tools and he was processing trauma. People sometimes start to think like, hey, everything's going to be better once I go to trauma, or once I go to therapy. And really the reality of it is that's where you start to learn the tools to unlock some of this trauma. And a lot of times you end up in treatment and these people are going to be like, okay, cool, tell me your trauma story, right? And I'm thinking like, no, there's so many boxes up there. Let's build the capacity to deal with those boxes before we ever start to open them. Because as soon as you start to deal with trauma, you open up those pieces of yourself, right, that speak volumes.
What I hear you saying is that this is not something that you're doing in an afternoon, right? This is not like one brave moment.
100%. And Greg said it too, right? He said you have to do the work, right? And if you start to do the work, I think you recognize that you do have tools, but sometimes once you open up those boxes, it's like, well, I thought I had the tools and now all of a sudden I'm screwed. And so what I would say is that there's kind of what I consider a three-prong approach, and that's that as soon as the brain decides that it's going to compartmentalize trauma, you have to find a way to build the brain and body connection, right? And that brain and body connection can mean anything from yoga, meditation. I don't care if it's mountain biking and go to the gym, right? But you have to start to be able to recognize that your brain's telling your body something and your body is sending that signal back. And if you don't feel it, then you have to be intentional about creating that. And I think the other piece to it too is that he's involved in rec therapy. So he's involved with other people, a community, connection, camaraderie, all those things that so many different people learn to love and enjoy. And then as soon as it's gone, it's like, well, how do I get that back, right? And again, in the show notes, we'll list a bunch of those resources. But those are the important things, right? Being intentional with your treatment, getting connected with the brain and the body, making sure that you have connection with other human beings. And then, of course, you got to have somebody that you can talk to.
And remembering that even when you're at a low point, it's still worth doing those rec therapy things. It's still worth being around people, and people want you around too. They really do.
Well, and I think this is that piece of a playwright, a Green Beret, and a clinician walk into a recording studio, right? And how do we have those connections and make sure that we create a community across the board that's supportive for everyone? And having Greg be willing to come and share your story, and knowing that it is a difficult thing, and that in order to support growth and individual growth and healing, oftentimes what you need are those resources. And those resources come in all different sorts and forms and fashions. That the rec community piece, the shared experience that we've all had of struggle or of loss or of pain, and although our stories may not all be the same, we have a story that we can share. And one of the things that I think is super important about the work that we're doing is being able to connect across the board. So whether that's with the veteran community, whether that's with the civilian community, whether that's with the substance use, whatever that looks like, is that part of what it is that we're trying to do with this project is to begin to bridge the gap and help folks recognize that you're not by yourself on this. Whatever community you are in, you can find the support that you need. And oftentimes we need to be able to do that healing ourselves, which I think was just so eloquently displayed. And that healing will come with work, and that work is worth it, because if you're willing to do the work,
it's hard.
It can be very difficult, and that work gives you the opportunity to be able to move forward and to be able to share your story and to heal in a way that's authentic and genuine.
I think the last piece that runs through my head while we talk about this is that when I came into the veteran space, one of the things I immediately wanted to look for was resources. And I want all the listeners to know I found a boatload. I mean, I found a ton. So to be very, very clear, there are resources. There are tons of resources. You just have to find the right avenue of which to use to get to them. And I recognize that access is a big part of that, but there are resources. So don't feel like you're going to be left hanging. We can find a way to get you there. We just have to get you to that place where you want to get off the couch and want to get out of the house. No more isolation. Get into it.
Open the curtains up, let the sunshine in.
100%.
Yep.
We will find a way. We will get you there. The resources are there.
And to both your points, we're here for you. We want to be that resource. So, on an episode that honestly, of course, I mean, we could go for hours on this. And it's with gratitude and with the promise of more to come that we're going to close out episode 4. And I think we can agree, right?
I have to say one more thing.
Do it.
Greg, welcome home.
Yeah, man.
That was beautiful.
Yeah, man.
Super cool.
All right. And listen, right? It doesn't matter if you're in the 8-foot pool or the 20-foot pool. Like we always say, you're worth the healing.
Hi, my name is Watika Ling, and I'm the CEO of Warrior Now. And I want to thank you for listening to Harder Than Healing, produced in partnership with All Points North and Warrior Now. This podcast is recorded on the APN campus in Edwards, Colorado. Warrior Now is a nonprofit organization that provides veterans a whole health approach through peer-to-peer services. For more information, you can contact us at info@warriornow.org or pod@harderthanhealing.com. You can also find us on all social media platforms at Warrior Now. Like, share, or subscribe for new episodes. Thank you.